It's a nightmare.
Cherry is a new film starring Tom Holland and is directed by the Russo Brothers, who directed multiple MCU films, including Infinity War and Endgame. An army medic suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder becomes a serial bank robber after an addiction to drugs puts him in debt. This film is also based off an autobiography by Nico Walker, so this film is loosely based off true events. A lot of this stuff actually happened. Nico Walker was living in Cleveland when he was robbing all these banks, and the Russo Brothers are from Cleveland, so most of this film was shot in Cleveland, but there was a lot of areas I recognized. There was a lot of buildings and neighborhoods that I recognized, and I thought that was really cool. I was also very excited for this film because the Russo brothers directed it, and they did a lot for the MCU. Infinity War and Endgame are my two favorite MCU movies, and I obviously love Winter Soldier and Civil War. And I also love Tom Holland. So when you combine all these things together, I'm obviously going to be very excited for this movie. Unfortunately, I was very disappointed by Cherry, and I don't know really where to pinpoint what went wrong with this movie. It's not that I hate this movie. It's just really weird. It's hard to explain some of the things that went wrong in this film. I'll first just talk about what I liked. I think there are some good shots in this film. I think the Russo brothers had some sequences that I thought really worked. There's one sequence that had no words of dialogue, and I thought it was great. I thought that really worked. And I think there's some shots that are pretty good, and I think there are some sequences that are very intense, and there are some themes that I found interesting but very dark. But the best part about this film is Tom Holland. He carries this whole entire movie. Without him, this movie would completely collapse on itself. This is his best performance of his career. He really gave it his all. And I'm extremely happy Tom Holland is taking roles outside the MCU. I obviously love him as Peter Parker, but he's also great in other roles, and he's not being typecast. He's taking on roles that are really dark, things that are extremely different than Peter Parker. But that's all I really got for positives for this film. Unfortunately, I don't think the Russo brothers did that great of a job with this film. They've obviously done great things with the MCU. I admittedly have never seen a Russo brother movie before I saw Winter Soldier. I could have seen one, I just didn't know. But to be honest, this is my first movie that I know of that isn't in the MCU that the Russo brothers directed, and it's weird. They make some really weird choices, and I'm glad they aren't scared to make these weird choices. I'm glad that they're basically doing just what they want. And like I said before, there are some good shots, and there are some choices they made that I thought were really good. But then there are some where I'm just like, oh, what the fuck is that? That's fucking weird. This film reminded me, and I think the Russo brothers were probably inspired by these films, but a lot of Scorsese films like Goodfellas or The Wolf of Wall Street, or even movies not from Martin Scorsese like Forrest Gump. There's a lot of voiceover, and we're just kind of going through this person's life. I think voiceover can work in a film. It works extremely well in Goodfellas, Wolf of Wall Street, and Forrest Gump. Here, it doesn't really work because there's a little too much exposition with these voiceovers. It becomes distracting at some points. Tom Holland breaks the fourth wall a lot of the times, and sometimes it works, but most of the time it doesn't really work. And it's weird. They do it for like the first half, 2/3 of the movie, and then after that, there's really no more voiceover, and really no more breaking the fourth wall, which I thought was weird. You would think they would just do that the whole entire movie, but they don't. This film feels like 3 mini films into one long movie, and this runtime is ridiculous. It's like 2.5 hours. It did not need to be this long. But the first act is like him falling in love with this girl, and the second act is him in Iraq, and then the third act is him robbing banks. I think there's some themes in this film that are dark and intense, and it sometimes works. Themes about regret, making the wrong decisions, and the fallout of that. Dealing with anxiety and depression, addiction, all of that. Sometimes it works, and sometimes you feel it. It's intense, it's fucked up, and you want to look away, but you can't. And sometimes it works. But then there are other times where, like I said before, they make really weird choices to show some things that I'm like, why is that even in there? It's just weird. And then there's themes in this film that they just throw in there, but they don't really explain it too much, or they don't really go into it too much. Like how the banking system fucks people over, because when he goes and robs banks, the banks aren't like Chase Bank or anything like that. It's like fuck you bank or something like that. And then they try and hint at another theme in this movie about how veterans are mistreated by the system and society that they don't really talk about too much. It's just in 2 lines, like 2 throwaway lines. They don't really talk about it much at all. So these 2 themes with the banking fucking people over and veterans getting fucked over, I don't know what the movie's going for because they don't really talk about it too much. It's just sort of thrown in there and then they don't talk about it again. In the end though, Cherry was disappointing. I don't hate this film. There are some good shots, there are some good sequences, there are some interesting and intense themes, and I thought Tom Holland was great in this film. But unfortunately, I thought the Russo brothers made some decisions that are a little bit too bold. I like directors making bold decisions and doing whatever they want. I'm extremely happy for the Russo brothers basically doing whatever they want, being like, we're going to make all these weird decisions. We're not just going to make another superhero action movie. We're going to do whatever we want. And I'm happy for them. But unfortunately for me, I thought some of those decisions were a little bit too weird and too distracting. Also, the movie is way too long. It could have been a lot shorter. I didn't really like some of the storytelling decisions, especially with the voiceovers. And it's unfortunate because it feels like there's a great movie here because it is an interesting story. It's an interesting character. There's a lot there. But unfortunately, I feel like it fell flat. I'm going to give Cherry 5.5 Davy Daves. Man, I really want to like this one. The Russo brothers are from Cleveland. I also love the MCU. Tom Holland is great. It's an interesting story. It was all shot in Cleveland. I really wish this would have worked out, but unfortunately, it just wasn't for me. And this movie comes out on Apple Plus or Apple TV Plus, whatever it's called, in like 2 weeks. So go check it out if you're a big Tom Holland fan, because he does carry this movie. Or if you really want to see it now, it's probably in a select theater near you. You just gotta look it up. So, Cherry, let me know what you guys think of it when you see it. I am curious to hear. Thank you so much for watching. Click here to see more of Dave's Takes.